everyone for being here on this Tuesday and joining me for, as Mary mentioned, this is the first in a two-part series for putting theories into practice, engaging empathy and trauma-informed librarianship. But to further introduce myself, my name is Emma Karin Eriksson. Emma or Emma Karin are both correct for my first name. I use she, her, and hers pronouns, and my day job is as a senior young adult librarian for the Brooklyn Public Library. More about myself, I think it's really important for me to mention that I am not perfect, nor am I an expert on anything that I'm going to talk about today. Everything that I share is built off of the research and the work of others, countless mistakes that I've made, and most importantly, the willingness to admit that I don't know everything. I'm always working on myself. I'm always listening and open to learning. And with that, I hope you will reach out to me after this presentation if you have any questions, you want to share feedback, share your experiences. Maybe I don't get to your question. My contact is there, and I'm very serious about collaborating and meeting with people. So please reach out if you have anything that you want to talk about. So I created these presentations after attending many different trauma-informed librarianship webinars and empathy webinars and feeling really energized, but not sure what the next step is. I left a lot of the presentations okay, and now what? Now what do I do? So this presentation, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about what trauma-informed care or trauma-informed librarianship what it is, but I have created this Padlet, which you will get the link to, where there's lots more resources and information that dives deeper into trauma-informed practice, and I encourage you to check it out. It's also technically collaborative, so if you have anything you want to add, please do. It'd be super cool to have this be a collaborative document that you all get to have input in on too. So this presentation is more about that what next, right? My hope is that you're going to leave with some practical tools, some skills that are going to help you engage trauma-informed theories into your work and personal practice. Our agenda for the day, first we're going to go over some definitions so that we can just all be on the same page with the terms that we're using. Then I'm going to touch a little bit on trauma in the library and then move to the bulk of the presentation, which is going to focus on determining beliefs, values, and attitudes, and then how to create goals and action plans into implementing theories and values into your library practice and everyday life. This is a library webinar, so obviously the focus is more of this in your everyday work in whatever information institution you're in, but this is also relevant to your everyday life as well. So those first definitions. So first, trauma. Trauma results from an series of events or circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. It has a lasting adverse effect on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Trauma can be acute, so, or from a single incident, or it can be chronic from repeated and prolonged experiences. It can also be systemic due to racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, fatphobia, white supremacy. It can be long-lasting and even inherited through intergenerational trauma or secondary trauma. Trauma-informed is an approach in human services fields that recognizes that an individual is more likely than not to have a history of trauma. It is also to create spaces and interactions that don't cause harm or re-traumatizations of others or yourself. So trauma-informed is essentially a lens through which we see our work and the way that we're going to be interacting with the public, much like anti-racism and feminism are lenses. Praxis is practice as distinguished from theory, which you're okay, doesn't that just mean practice? Yes. But I think it's a little bit deeper in that it's a direct recognition of the application or use of our knowledge into our skills. So my definition of praxis is the action of what we say becoming what we do. For example, you can say that you're anti-racist, but what are you doing that makes you an anti-racist, right? Are you donating to organizations? Are you supporting Black-owned businesses and creators? Are you intervening when someone makes racist comments? Are you also stepping back and allowing other Black voices to be centered? Because that is being anti-racist, and that is praxis. So accountability is engaging with the consequences of your decisions and actions. It is our job to hold ourselves accountable, right? That's on us. And this is an important, aspect for all of our lives, because all our decisions and actions have consequences, every single one of them. And when we're working on ourselves, trying to change, trying to grow, we're gonna make mistakes. It's just gonna happen. And we're gonna have to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and dealing with whatever fallout happens from what it is we're trying to learn, trying to do. And as the great Mia Mingus said, that accountability is not a destination, it is a skill we can build and practice. And that's a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. It's not a goal, it's not a check mark, it's something that you're going to be doing every day, and gets changes over time. So libraries are sites of trauma. Library work is not inherently traumatic, right? The process of circulating books and interacting with the public is not inherently traumatic. It's the spaces, the people, and their actions which can perpetuate trauma and trigger trauma responses, right? It's patrons that we interact with that have experienced trauma and can cause harm and trauma. It's workers, it's our coworkers, it's ourselves that have experienced trauma and can cause harm and trauma. It's workplace cultures and structures that can cause and perpetuate trauma. Societies, our institutions, history, systems of oppression, those are all of the things that create libraries as sites and of trauma and perpetuate trauma. In 2022, Urban Librarians Unite published their Urban Library Trauma Study final report, which outlines the ways in which trauma can show up in library spaces. And I really highly recommend giving it a read. It goes a lot more in depth than we can in these minutes here, and it has a lot of good ideas and solutions to different problems. But what can we do in these sites of trauma, right? How can we navigate all of this? And that's where the concept of trauma-informed librarianship comes in, to acknowledge that these are the realities, and then help to offer us a framework for how to work with the public, ourselves, our coworkers, our institutions, etc. Trauma-informed librarianship to me is, in a way, simple. It's don't make assumptions. It's checking in on myself, checking in on ourselves, holding ourselves accountable, treating people with care, and trying not to make things worse, right? And as mentioned before, these are all skills. There's gonna be learning curves, it's gonna take practice, and you're gonna fumble, but it will be okay. So I mentioned that I have attained many trauma-informed webinars, and one of the most helpful that I ever got to go to was Trauma-Informed Library Work, Deepening Awareness and Taking Action by Nisha Modi. Nisha is a librarian turned feminist healing coach, and I urge you to check out her website and upcoming workshop on boundaries, both of which are going to be linked in my Padlet. But in her workshop, she put forth this framework for trauma-informed action as a way to how do we engage these theories in our everyday practices? And she determined that for her, and I think for me, and it feels very applicable to most people, is that it's this constant cycle of reflecting, being, accepting, and doing. So we have to be reflecting on ourselves, our roles and responsibilities, our emotional labor and vocational awe, our organization's history and their actions. We also have to be accepting. And this is another good definition moment, right? It's important to recognize that the word accepting does not mean acceptable. So just because we're willing to accept ourselves, which is important, accept where we are, where we're going, it doesn't mean that every action we do is going to be tolerated or allowed. But we do need to engage in more self-acceptance of where we are in our journeys, and what maybe barriers exist in our journeys, what boundaries we need to set for ourselves, and how we can meet ourselves where we're at, instead of shaming or guilting ourselves because maybe we're not where somebody else is. Being is about sitting with yourself, right? Determining what feels safe for you, what doesn't, thinking about how you can reframe or shift your assumptions, asking yourself, what does maybe being more relational with people rather than transactional look like? And then last, doing is how can you, literally, like how can you do, but also how can you start small? How can you also assess what you've done? Who or what is maybe in the way of you doing? What are the things that you can do to make your actions also more, relational than transactional? So using this framework is going to help to guide us in developing our praxis of trauma-informed librarianship. I mentioned before, right, that I want to make these presentations as like, hoping to close that gap between what we say and what we do, and to create this starting point for how we put these good ideas and theories into work that we do every day. And for that, we have to start with you. First of all, you are the most important, beautiful thing, and you're so special, and you deserve a gold star for simply existing in like the harsh realities of the world right now. But that doesn't mean that, we can't improve ourselves, because none of us are perfect. None of us are also ever finished learning and growing. And it's important to remember that empathy and trauma-informed practice and anti-racism and being an ally and all of those things is not about other people, right? It's about you. It's about how you react to someone, how you handle a situation, what you do and what you don't do, because no one can control another person. As much as we might want to be able to sometimes, we can really only control ourselves and our reaction to situations and people behavior. Now, here's where I do want to pause and mention that while it does start with us and our individual actions, in library world, it also needs to start with our institutions, right? They need to be supporting us and helping us to create the spaces and policies that don't re-traumatize people. But unfortunately, I cannot control them. All I can do is support you, help you, urge you to get involved with your unions, or unionize if you're not, and to try to be the change that you want to see in the world. And hopefully, someday we'll all be running the library and we'll be the director and we can do our top down from there. So one way that we can work on ourselves to aid in bringing those trauma-informed practices into our library spaces is by working on our emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, or EI, is the ability to recognize, understand, manage your own emotions and the emotions of people around you. So it can be really helpful in like relieving stress or communicating effectively, empathizing with others, and to help like diffuse conflict. So there's 6 components to emotional intelligence. The first is self-awareness, recognizing and understanding your own emotions, self-regulation, managing your emotions, self-motivation, setting standards for yourself and working towards goals, social awareness, the ability to consider the perspective of others, which is essentially empathy, and social skills, the ability to interact with other people. In this session, we're going to be exploring tools to work on the self-awareness and self-motivation parts of emotional intelligence. And both of those things can be engaged when we interrogate our beliefs, values, and attitudes. Our beliefs are the ideologies that help us to interpret our everyday life, essentially. And then beliefs are distilled into our values that are abstract standards that serve to also sort of guide our lives. And our attitudes are the outward manifestation of those beliefs and values. Our values and our beliefs grow and expand throughout our lives. They're shaped right by like experiences, education, relationships, and they determine the attitudes, right, of how we interact with people. And I think they're so important, but we really rarely take the time to sort of like purposely sit and interrogate them. An example of the beliefs, values, and attitudes is one of my beliefs is that I believe every human being is deserving of dignity and respect, which is a tenet of transformative justice, which means I also value human life in all of its complexities, which is sometimes hard to reckon with. But this is expressed as an attitude when I try to treat everyone with kindness and I try not to make the assumptions of people before I meet them. And I say try because am I always great at this? Absolutely not. I am a white woman. I have many conscious and unconscious biases within me that I must actively work on in order to make sure that I'm upholding my values and interrogate my attitudes to make sure that they're aligning with this belief that I have. So I've created an exercise that's meant to assist you in determining your values and understanding what they're going to look like as attitudes. So this exercise is not meant to be done quickly, but I don't know about you, there's many times where I've gone to a webinar and been shown an exercise. I'm like, oh, I'm going to do that later. And then it never happens. And I really want us to engage in some work today. So we're going to try to do a very condensed version with the hope that you'll be able to do the whole thing, maybe when you have some space and time. So you were sent the work, or some of you were hopefully got the worksheet. If you printed it out, that is great. If not, this is a link that should take you to a virtual PDF, which there's like a pen tool and you can use to circle, or on the next slide, I have the whole worksheet as a slide. So if you have some scrap paper and a pencil, you can, obviously instead of circling it, you can just hopefully write some of the words down. And so the first step of this exercise essentially asks you, without giving much thought, to circle all the words that you feel represent your values and to circle as many as you want. The next step then asks to take all of the words that you circled and try to put them into groups of similar terms and select one word from each group to help narrow them down. This is the worksheet essentially in a different format. For those of you who are able to print it out or have the virtual PDF, I think it's on the second to last page. I'm going to set a timer for about 6 minutes, and don't feel rushed or pressured to you have to circle every word and refine them. Just do what you can do in 6 minutes. Circle as many as you can, and then we'll regroup. And I'll check in with you at around 5 minutes to let you know that you have 1 minute left. All right, I'm gonna come back. And hopefully you've been able to circle even just a few words. Maybe you've been able to refine them. But now I'm going to move into the sort of second part of the activity. This is where we're going to turn the words of the values that we just circled into what I call value or values in action statements. So the words by themselves are all well and fine, but that's what they are, right? They're just one word. I take this another step by adding a verb before the word to create what I'm calling, right, these values and action statements. And they're meant to act as a guide for you to see what your values look like in attitudes and in practice. It's also, I think, very helpful to write out the definitions for these values, because maybe, not everyone has the same idea of what does usefulness or purpose look like. So here are some values turned into the action statements, and then the definitions. These are just definitions that I made for these words. You might have different. I'm gonna read some of them aloud, but if you want, while I'm talking, you can also be writing definitions or your statements for yourself. So you could take the value of well-being, and your action statement is centering well-being. The definition of that for you is that you're going to make more time to reset and relax. Grace could mean you want to turn your statement into give grace. And that for you means trying not to jump to conclusions, giving people the benefit of the doubt. Success, this is one that I use actually in mine, is redefine success. And that for me is celebrate small wins. I try to post, when I get a high score in the New York Times mini, that for me is a small win and I'm going to celebrate it. Community, which is a big word for everyone, but sometimes has many different meanings. So an action statement there could be build community. And the definition of that, what that looks like for you, is to set intentional time with your family, your friends, your neighbors. So when we engage in this type of like self-interrogation, like completing this activity, we're building our self-awareness skills because we're checking in with ourselves, right? We're determining our belief systems, defining our values. We're setting standards for ourselves, which is a part of self-motivation. So you're activating both these parts. It also activates the reflecting, being, and hopefully accepting parts of that framework for trauma-informed action. So of course, right, now you've got some values, you've got these statements, but we've got to put them into practice and try to engage in them and figure out what that looks like in our everyday interactions. Before I move on to the next section, I'm just gonna one more time really stress that I recommend that you go back, read through the full worksheet and directions when you get a chance, do the exercise when you have time to just like completely focus on it. And there are more instructions in there for how to consider like work values as separate from personal values, seeing where they overlap, and then some guided reflection questions. This is also not like a one and done exercise. I try to do this worksheet like once a year, if I remember. I've had people reach out to me and tell me that they did this activity like with their team or their group to help determine group values. So this is something that you are, can come back to. If you do use it in a group setting or something, please let me know, just because I'm excited when I get to hear, like, see the life that this exercise takes on outside of when I show it to people. So next, we're going to work on more of the self-motivation skills that will help us put some of these values we just identified into action. I don't know about you, but for me, setting and sticking to goals is really not one of my strong suits at all. I actually did a whole team program about goal setting, and the whole time I just felt like a complete fraud. But I try to remind myself that goal setting and sticking to things, it's just another skill that takes practice. And also it's going to take some time to figure out what works for me instead of trying to fit like what works for somebody else. Like bullet journaling, I can't do it. I tried it, I can't do it. So I try to come up with what will help me and work for me. And I'm going to share with you the tools that work for me. So when I'm trying to do something, anything, I try to use this system. So I think of the ultimate goal that I want, what is like the end result, what are the smaller steps that I need to achieve that goal, and then figuring out the steps of an action plan. So I made, I totally forgot to stick with my slide. So the ultimate goal, right? Big picture, best case scenario. You can use the SMART goals technique, which is creating goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. I do find it can be helpful because sometimes we just make these like very broad sweeping comments about what we want to do. And then we feel like we can't live up to whatever it is that we're expecting of ourselves. And then those smaller steps, so bite-sized pieces. Maybe you need to do some background information or research. Maybe you need to figure out, okay, like what's the thing that has to happen first, then next, and then last, because things do have an order to them. And then finally, you set your plan. So figure out what can you do right now? Like what's the most immediate thing that you can just like stand up and go do to help you feel kind of accomplished? What else do you need to do so you'll stick to your plan? And most importantly, for me, especially, is how can you hold yourself accountable, right? How can you make sure that you're doing the things that you said you wanted to do? So I chose, let's say, builds community is my value and action statement. That's kind of my ultimate goal. Let's use this tool for that. So the ultimate goal, right, is build community. But that again is kind of really broad. So I've broken it down into, I want to spend time at least once a week with a friend. I want to try to call people on my walk home, and I want to set up monthly game nights. So what am I going to do to break that down into smaller steps? So first, I'm going to figure out what my friends' typical weekly schedules are, because I can't plan to hang out with them if our schedules are totally misaligned. Or I can say like, okay, well, I know this person is free that night, so maybe I can swap something around so I could be free that night. Next, I'm going to put reminders in my phone for like when I'm walking home to make a call. I am very well known through some of my friends that I still have on my phone an alarm that goes off at noon that tells me to drink water, because that's just a thing that I need. And I find it incredibly helpful because I'll forget. So to have that thing that just kind of goes off, it's automatic, I don't have to think about it, is a good step for me to take to remind me, okay, you got to call people on your walk home. Maybe I could make a list of my friends, pick an easy recurring date and time, and start selecting possible games for my board game night. Those are things that I kind of have to do first, next, and last before I can move on to hosting my monthly game night, which I am trying to start. And if you want to come play games, let me know. My plan, right? Setting my action plan, what am I going to do is the first thing I can do, you know what? It's probably easier for me to hang out with someone who lives really close. So who's my closest friend or a friend at work that I could go out with? Let me just make a plan with them and we'll go do that. Even if it's for next week, I'm going to go do that kind of immediately. I can call someone right now. I can just pick up the phone, be like, I'm not going to wait until my next walk home. I'm just going to call them right away. Then maybe to help hold me accountable for game night, I'm going to send an email to all of my friends, letting them know this is something I want to do. Maybe I'll go out and get games, I'll buy them, or I'll borrow them from the Brooklyn Public Library board game library. Maybe I also really need to tidy my house. That's the thing that I got to do before all these people come over. And then I'm going to make a snack list. These are all smaller things that once I accomplish that will help me get to my ultimate goal of having the monthly game night and ultimately building community. I also did another one for if you want to bring trauma-informed library praxis into your everyday, because that's probably why most of you are here. So that could maybe look like, right, your ultimate goal is to engage trauma-informed approaches in your library work. Very commendable, by the way. So some of the smaller steps, you can review the, I always say SAMHSA, but I know it should be SAMHSA, but that is also too long. You can review their document, Concept of Trauma and Guidance for a Trauma-Informed Approach, which is in the Padlet. It is not geared towards libraries at all, but you can definitely see the connections between what they're saying and how it could be applied to libraries. And then maybe your other small step could be that you're going to come up with a list of ideas for using a trauma-informed approach that you can implement at your branch. So after reviewing the guide, after attending this, after talking with friends, you're just going to come up with your list of ideas and think about like, okay, in my interactions, in my programs, in my emails, in my whatever. Those are some smaller steps. Then for your plan, one of the first things you could do, and it is recommended in my exercise, is to write your values and action statements out and put them somewhere where you can see them. So you can use it as a reminder, like, this is the goal, this is what you're working towards, this is what you're trying to engage in. You can share your ideas at your next staff meeting or with colleagues. Talking with people really helps, not only to get your ideas out there, but to hold yourself accountable that this is the thing you're trying to do. And last, you can maybe, use the interactive roadmap to keep track of your progress. This is from, I think it's called Trauma Informed Oregon, and it's also in the Padlet, but it is essentially a roadmap for trauma informed. So it's like, you're trauma aware, and at the end, you're trauma informed. And it gives a lot of good ideas. I think it's more, again, for healthcare, but it is a good framework to help you set up how you can apply it to your library life, your library work. Now we've set some goals, we've started these great action plans, we're all jazzed up, and then, tomorrow happens and suddenly you've forgotten everything, which is I'm so guilty of. But here are some ways that I find help me try to stick to things, and so I hope that they will be helpful to you. So the first is a visual one. Anyone who has ever seen my desk or has been to my house knows that I am all about the affirmations, writing things down like your values and action statements, writing out your goals, writing out, positive reinforcement and putting them somewhere you're going to see it is absolutely going to help be a visual reminder to you every day that this is what you're trying to do. This is what you're trying to work for, and also help to act, as a empowering thing to see and to be reminded of. Maria said a couple times, worth repeating, tell people what you're doing. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your other staff members, hey, I'm really trying to bring more trauma-informed, practices into the library. What do you know about that? Are you interested in doing it with me? Tell them that, you're working on interrogating your values and working on yourself. And they maybe don't have anything to say, or they may also be like, oh, that's really interesting. I would love to join you in that. Or, they can say, oh, Emma, didn't you say that you were going to do this thing? And I see that you're not doing it. They can also kind of help, nudge you and remind you. high tech. Most of us have smartphones. I do know many people still have flip phones, but those flip phones still have calendar apps. I remember because I did have a calendar in my flip phone. And you can set alarms with them to remind yourself, right? This is coming up. This is the deadline for this thing. This is, I want to remind myself that I was going to set up a game night. What's the day of the week it's going to be? Or just use the Notes app to keep a list of your values and goals, you know, so you like keep that thing on you. You got it all the time. And low tech is very similar to all of these, but I think it can be helpful to create like a dedicated notebook or a physical calendar to keep track of ideas and progress. I have many notebooks. They're great to refer back to. And there has been, you know, a lot of science out there saying that like when we handwrite things, it can help stick with us in our muscle and our mind memory. So worth a shot. Plus then you can decorate it, which is always fun. These are all those ideas, right, to help stick to what you're doing, because what you say is nothing without what you're going to do, right? Praxis is the putting of what we say into what we do. And all of the things that we're learning, hopefully some of the things I shared with you today are going to help you close that gap between what you say and what you do. So in the chat, and I'm going to try to keep my eyes on it because I'm always interested in seeing what people respond to this, but what is one thing that you can commit to doing after you leave this webinar? For most of us, it might be the end of the day, so all we're thinking about is going home. But it would be great if you can just take a second, think about what's one thing you can do. Maybe it's related to what you've learned here today. Maybe it's related to the value or goal you've set, or maybe something totally different. Maybe it's like, I've been really talking about doing self-care, but I haven't really done it. So before I go home from work today, I'm going to go stop off and I'm going to go get myself like a bubble bath bomb or something like that. But what's one thing that you can commit to doing after you leave this webinar? Just drop it in the chat and I'll keep my eyes on it because I'll hold you accountable. See if you were able to do it afterwards. And essentially, we are at the end of the presentation and we'll open it up to questions, but I will remind you that this is a two-part series. If you didn't, I mean, you're obviously here and attending this one, but if anyone asks, you do not have had to attend this one in order to attend the second one. They're complementary, but they're not, don't have to be taken sequentially. So in the next session, we're going to talk about empathy and we'll identify it more in practice and action. I'm going to explain and demonstrate critical reflective practice. And there's two bits to that. So reflection in action. So like you're immediately doing something and you're reflecting on it as you're doing it as a way to change the way that you're having that interaction. And then reflection on action, which is like a past reflection on something that has happened. And then we're going to talk about practicing grounding and reflection and action techniques. And if there's anything, that you feel like I didn't cover or that you're really interested in, my email is truly open. So reach out to me. I am making these presentations to help you. So I want to know what is going to be the most helpful for you, what you're the most interested in learning. And that is all she wrote, folks. Thank you so much for sitting here and listening to me for this hour. And if I'm really excited to hear any questions you have or just chat, we're all good.